We had a good day. Things went real smooth today, which was nice. It's not always the norm. We were expecting and hoping to receive 15 NLIs, and we got all 15. And for the most part, had everything kind of locked up by maybe 9 in the morning thereabouts. So, really excited about this group. Very appreciative of the efforts of our staff. Our staff worked extremely hard. I think, as everybody knows, this is a year-round project. With most of these guys in this particular class, we began recruiting them at our junior day, which is actually this coming year's class. We're going to start on Saturday. This Saturday at the UMass basketball game, we're going to have our junior day for our class of 2017. So we work this thing really around the clock, and I feel real good about what we were able to accomplish. Most all of these guys have had some history with us. They have been either at our one-day camp, at our junior day, on campus with their family in the summer, on campus for a football game this fall, and obviously on campus for the official visit. So I really felt as if we have had a lot of history with these student athletes and with their families, which I think is really good and really positive. We set out this year with our focus really being on three definitive areas that we wanted to address. I think the first area I would just reference as big bodies. I have an understanding and appreciation that we lost a couple offensive linemen last year in Austin Gunn and Jacob Ruby. This year we lost a couple of offensive linemen with Nick Richer and Caleb High. This coming season we'll have two senior offensive linemen in the group with Nicholas Virgos and Thomas Evans. So I wanted to make sure that we addressed the big body issue. Also in the defensive line, as you all know, last year we lost 6 guys to graduation, and I felt like we needed to continue to bolster that group right there. So we signed 6 of the 15 today. We'll be playing in the offensive or defensive line, and a number of these guys, as you know, play both sides of the ball. So, but it looks like we'll have 4 offensive linemen, 2 defensive linemen in the group. I think probably to people that follow our program, the most specific, immediate position to identify would be that of running back, with Jacoby Green and Seth Fisher moving on. We don't have necessarily the depth of talent at the position on our spring roster, though I feel real good about the guys that we have on our roster this spring. So we were able to go out and sign 2 running backs that we're extremely excited about. Xavier Goodall from Henrico here, local, is a dynamic back, and he's a special player and an athlete and a special young man. And then A.J. Hines is also a very exceptional athlete, football player, and human being. And so I really like what we got there. And I don't want to say Jacoby and Seth, because they're not Jacoby and Seth, but, we do have 2 young backs coming in here that offer us some definitive reality of being able to run the ball with power and authority. And when you put them in with the guys we'll have out there this spring, I think we certainly have helped ourselves in that area. And then lastly, it was just more what I would reference as defensive perimeter players. And these are hybrid players, corner safeties, outside linebackers, guys that can play multiple positions for you defensively. We had a couple of Herlocker, Io are gone in the secondary. Got a couple of seniors in this year's class that'll be playing their last year next year. So we wanted to be able to get some players in those areas, and we got 4 players that we consider to be defensive perimeter players. So I think all said and done, the reality is we met our needs. That's always the most important thing to do. I think that when you look at our footprint, I could not be more excited than realizing here that we signed 7 players from our home state. And when I came here, I really wanted that to be a big part of our footprint and our makeup and our philosophy in building our program. And this, to me, was just a home run. This is a great group of in-state talent, a number of local players that we have a lot of history with. Again, all these in-state kids are in our camp. They were at our junior days. We've got great relationships, extended relationships with the student athletes and their families. And then got 4 guys out of Florida, which was extremely exciting. And I think it speaks volumes of our branding and how recognizable our product is, not only as a university and the academic reputation, but then obviously the football success, So that was exciting to me. And then we had a player out of North Carolina, Pennsylvania, Georgia, and New York. So we had really good balance right there with this particular class. Coach Woods did an outstanding job kind of overseeing the recruiting. And, I've put a lot on Sparky since his arrival here over a year, just about a year ago. And I do think that his efforts really paid dividends for us here this year as we put together this particular class. So we're really excited about it, excited about our future, and we're hopeful to continue to build our program. At this question, I'll take any times here. At this time. I was good to there. At this time, I'll take any questions from the media. I usually do that one very well.
You mentioned the length of time that is involved in this, but I wonder if the playoff run may have given you an extra bump with some guys.
Yeah, I think it's a great topic of discussion. There were 2 things that were happening during the playoff run. One was we were unable to recruit. So you're always a little bit fearful of what's going on when you're not out on the road and other people are. But to your point, the dividends far outweighs that reality that you're not on the road because you're playing in the postseason and you're getting national attention and you're really out there branding your product. So I do think that the postseason run did nothing but help motivate and generate enthusiasm for this group of student athletes. But we didn't necessarily go out and get another player that we were not involved with through the process because of the postseason run. So I think that we have a lot of filters that we work through to put our class together. All of these guys have been through those filters, and they were all in and through pretty early in the process. I think the postseason exposure and success just generated more energy and enthusiasm for their decision.
Coach, I think you said before, and you can correct me if I'm wrong, that at the FCS level, you're not necessarily chasing the big 4- and 5-star recruits. It's more guys you think you can develop. When you're looking at these recruits, what are some traits and some attributes that just make a guy jump out as a developmental guy?
Well, I think there's probably a couple things that we're looking at. I think one is just their leadership qualities. And their maybe versatility for like the different jobs that they can do. In reality, as you guys have seen here in this class, I did not sign a wide receiver. And that was somewhat by design. We have a number of very talented wide receivers coming back. I did not sign a tight end in this class. I didn't lose a tight end this year, and I don't have a tight end in my roster now that's a senior next year. So there are some strategies that go into managing, a smaller pool of scholarships. All right, so at this level, it's not necessarily a reality that I'm going to take one of those and one of those and one of those and one of those. I'm going to make sure on my roster I have enough players at each position to help this year's team be successful. And I'm always talking about that. It's always about this year's team. There's an element of building for the future, but I always have to solve this year's problems first. And that's why I think this group is ideal, because we've really addressed those things that are specific to this year. Now, I didn't really answer your question, but some of the realities, though, that are different is, we're looking for guys that have some versatility, that can do a number of different jobs, multiple positions, maybe two-way players, and then guys that are in winning programs, and guys that are leaders and are of good character. Those are some of the things that we are really trying to determine with our pool of talent. Not that the higher level isn't, but the first thing that jumps off there is the talent. The talent just jumps so far off the screen that these become the guys. And when you're really working at this level, you're looking for a lot of things that go beyond that talent.
It sounds like the playoff push may help you in the future.
That's well said, John.
And I wonder if at the same time, ESPN's College Game Days could have the same effect on the next year's class and the next year's class.
I thought about that yesterday, talking to the staff about this class and the future of our recruiting. I think that's dead on. I think that the reaction we get here at Junior Day on Saturday is going to be more a flow or a function of the playoff run and the win on the road at James Madison, and because the timeline plays out that way. It's almost like I've said very openly here before, we can only talk about the 08 National Championship for so long. Now, I'm always going to have the trophy, and I'm always going to have that somewhere in my back pocket, but it's not up-to-date news. Okay, well, the playoff run this year, the national semifinals, that's up to speed. That is what these young people are seeing and watching. So I think you're exactly right, and I'm excited about that. And as we kind of head into this next recruiting cycle, we will have back-to-back, postseason opportunities, and those things become more and more, I think, cause for momentum.
The playoff run definitely helps, of course, for all the reasons you just said, I'm sure. But I wonder, life in the FCS, you have a playoff run like that, you lose your OC, you lose your DC, and a lot of times those are some of the guys that are helping to recruit. So was it difficult at all to still bring in the kids you wanted to get despite losing some of those coaches?
Yeah. Kind of some unexpected consequences, maybe from the success that we had. I think that I go back maybe to one of the comments I made earlier about Coach Woods. Sparky was kind of able to help oversee this process, from beginning to end. When I was looking for a replacement for Charlie Fisher, obviously Sparky was kind of the first thought, but now I'm moving a lot of things around, and I'm really reinventing, my staff, and kind of spoke with Sparky about right now it's really important that we wrap this class up, and Coach Woods, he gets all that in a big way. So the one thing that you do now in recruiting that maybe you didn't do 10, 12 years ago, but you do a lot of team recruiting. So we start geographically. Every coach has geographical areas, in-state, out-of-state. But once you get connected to the student-athlete, you're involving other coaches on your staff. Sometimes it's position specific, sometimes it's background specific, sometimes it's just history with the coach at the high school or whatever. So in reality, as soon as guys did leave our staff, we had other guys that were very much front and center who had already been there. They had already been in the schools, they had already been with the student athlete, met the family. So fortunately, we didn't really lose any players to this, and I never thought we really lost any momentum in recruiting. And then I think our ability and our track record of being able to go out and bring in quality coaches allows people to be confident that we will do that and we will continue to do that. So I think there's some peace there as the student athletes were making these decisions, maybe without really knowing who was going to coach this or who was going to coach that. And at the end of the day, really the best message for me as the head coach is it's my offense and it's my defense. So, those things aren't going to change. And then just have enough trust that the people that we bring in will have the same core values and the same beliefs that we have had and that I have. And then they are able to kind of buy that. And then whoever that gentleman ends up being then offers or brings more to the table. And right now, really excited about having John Garrett on staff here.
Nothing new with your defensive coordinator at this time?
I'm real close, and I honestly thought I'd have an announcement today, and I think I'm going to have an announcement tomorrow. So, John, can you wait until tomorrow?
Certainly.
Okay.
Hey, when you hit the road, do you hear much or feel much, sense much about that game day, which is sort of an unprecedented spotlight that...
Yeah. It was extraordinary in terms of the impact that I think it has had for FCS football. And for our league, and then maybe for us. You know what I mean? Like, it's not really about us. We happen to be the team that, stole the show that day. I mean, that's awesome. But it was bigger than that. It was bigger than that.
Final question from me, at least. It's you signed 4 kids from the Richmond area, 7 kids from the state. JMU also very active in this area. They've got a new coach up there. I wonder, not mentioning any names, but considering they're a major rival in the game day we just mentioned, can you think of some kids that you guys went head to head on?
Yes.
There are definitely some places where you guys are going up against them. Okay.
Yeah, no doubt. And because of the nature of the early commit in today's recruiting, a lot of these decisions are made earlier in the process. So there's not as much of the old, I'm not talking about us and JMU, I'm just talking about your classic rivalry and your thinking. There's not quite as much, gloves off on the last week of recruiting. Now, if you watched ESPN today, I mean, obviously, some of your SEC schools, and they're having some of those ongoing right up to the signing date. Now, it's not quite as prominent at the FCS level, and with the earlier commitments, it's becoming even less and less. It wasn't too many years ago that these student athletes were all committing after their January visits. And then you had a lot of guys that were kind of in play for both schools. As per JMU, the guys that we kind of were both in play with were all kind of through the summer and maybe into the early fall. And then our guys kind of chose us and their guys kind of chose them. And then as you got into November, December, there really wasn't a whole lot of, we're both trying to get that same student athlete.
Been through a 4-year cycle now here. I presume you have a better sense as to the kind of people and the kind of players that work at Richmond and the CAA. Is that significant?
Yeah, I think it is. I think that, I think the fact that I had the opportunity to spend 6 years at Liberty as the head football coach was essential. For me to gauge, what FCS football is and what it takes. And, prior to that, I was the recruiting coordinator at UVA, so I had a really good feel of the talent in the state. And I really felt like, even when I went to Liberty, I really felt like, let's not recruit him because he's going to end up at UVA, or let's not recruit him because he's going to end up, that type of thing. So I kind of knew where those thresholds were, So to Richmond, It is a different entity, no doubt. The conference is a different conference, but I think that pool and that level of player is very consistent to what I learned and experienced, before I came here. But I think that in this league, there's a certain way that you have to play, in my opinion, and I do think that you have to be able to present a physical football team, and I think you have to be a line of scrimmage football team, and you got to be able to have that type of volume of offensive and defensive linemen to have a chance in this league. Maybe I didn't really feel that way in the last league I was in, but I still think it's basically the same type of recruitable players.
People are always interested in which one of these guys could have gone FBS and chose not. Were there a handful? Were there a couple? I know Goodall had a couple of FBS offers.
Yeah, there's a handful. Now, here's the thing that I have had to clarify for families and student athletes, and then maybe I'm going to clarify it here today. There is such a big difference between BCS and FBS. Okay, so like so there's a lot of FBS schools out there talking like they're BCS, where they're not. Okay, and sometimes the rhetoric that the student athlete's hearing is he's hearing it as if the school's in the SEC or the school's in the Big Ten or the ACC, and the school's not. Okay, so at the end of the day, the CAA stacks up very, very favorably to the vast majority of FBS conferences. The only difference is 85 versus 63. All right, we had a couple of head-to-head conversations with some student athletes this year about the National Football League. And there was this image that, well, if I go to school B, I got a better chance of going to the National Football League. And why is that? Show me that. Then I pulled it up, my research, it wasn't even close.
You're talking about lower level FBS.
Not BCS.
Yeah.
That's FBS. It wasn't even close in terms of what Richmond has put out there, what the CAA has put out there. So, in reality, if you're a pro scout and you go look at a player at Purdue, well, he's playing against Ohio State, Michigan, Michigan State, Iowa, Nebraska, Penn State. Who did I leave out? Okay, every week. Well, that's not who you play against if you're at an FBS school. Okay, so that gap is so much closer when you look at talent. Okay, what separates is just the volume of players. So we had a number of these kids, student athletes, involved with FBS schools. And a lot of them were doing the spring and summer tour, which included a lot of the FBS schools. And they were able to recognize what I just said. And then the academic trump card is hard to beat when you're talking to the right culture of people.
No January transfers.
Well, Jake Kleiss we brought in here. Jake is out of the Annapolis area. He's a quarterback. Was at LSU most recently. As you know, I've been away more than here, and we kind of just got plugged back in here Monday, and we'll kind of get back into our player workouts here real soon. But that would be the answer to your question.
Do you presume that, you had 5 FBS guys last year. I wonder if, as the spring and summer progress, would you anticipate bringing some more guys in?
I think I'm always going to be open to it and want to have the ability to maybe solve a problem or fill a need. So the likelihood is probably a yes. I don't see it being, like a multiple type of solution or answer, but I could see the possibility of bringing in somebody here in June after spring ball finishes, and we have a better idea as to what our needs are for 2016.
Hey, you're too deep for North Dakota State would suggest your house is in order in terms of class breakdown of guys playing. Do you feel that way? And you're in good shape here. You're not playing too many in some class and not many in others.
Yeah, I just actually went over our roster with John Garrett, and I have a color-coded roster that's all done by position, and it's all done by classification, years of eligibility. You know, red's got 1 year, black's got 2 years, green's got 3, blue's got 4. And when you do it like that, you have a really good understanding of what, it's not a depth chart. You just have a really good understanding of what and where your attention needs to go. And to your point, I think yes. I mean, we had a lot of guys playing in that North Dakota State game that are returning. We had a lot of balance at a lot of positions. With guys that are young, guys that are in their second, third year, guys that are moving into their senior year. We just have pretty good distribution. Now, you know that I always want more players. You know, I'm always going to be saying that I need more players, and that would be through the walk-on program and et cetera. But as far as distribution and balance, yeah, I felt pretty good. I just went over it with John because I wanted to present the document to him and let him work through it, think through it. But we recruit to that. So a lot of my recruiting decisions are based on what that document looks like, because I can't let that get skewed before we get started. It might get skewed at a later date, but not before we get started.
Do you have a walk-on number you want to go with these 15?
Yeah, 6 plus or minus. Yeah.